Awesome. Hey everybody, this is Aetherforce. I'm here live with Thomas Joseph Brown, the one and only. Tom, what's up, brother?
Hey, it's a good day. Good to talk with you, Tech.
You
Lovely to be
coming
here.
coming to us from Auckland, right? New Zealand.
Auckland, New Zealand. Sunny spring day here.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us, brother. So,
Yeah.
disappearing stars. So when you get to a certain altitude, you can't see the stars. I remember being in a plane, every single plane I've been on in my life, that was at night. I looked up and I could never see stars.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I believe I've seen potentially like Venus or Jupiter. I think I've seen some like that. But um, why don't we start out and show folks, because people go, wait a minute, you can't see the stars. What are you talking about? We have a picture here, I believe, of the stars taken from the International Space Station. Um,
Is this it?
yeah.
This is a pretty
That
awesome
is,
picture.
right, that's a time lapse of Don Petit, I believe is his name, the man on the space station who's been taking pictures such as this. So obviously, pictures have been taken of stars in space and people have seen them. However, that's not the whole story, as we're about to find out here. And we were hoping to play some videos, but we discovered some serious limits here on this Hangout technology. So we'll put some links for these. But these are sort of classic things. Is one of the ones we're going to play is at this press conference when the Apollo 11 crew came back from their alleged trip to the moon, and the British astronomer Patrick Moore asks them, "Oh, could you see the stars in space?" And three of them are looking at each other, all confused, like they forgot what to say. Go, yeah, I think so. And I go, nah, I didn't see them. I go, yeah, well, maybe through the optics we did. And it's like, yeah, they're like, they got caught, right? Well, can you see them? Can't you see them? And I think a good thing to put in here is like when Neil Armstrong, 25 years later, when he was at the White House, and he's given a speech, and he says, today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers. There are places to go beyond belief. Now, what do you tell a bunch of school kids that on the 25th anniversary of the moon for? This is a guy who couldn't remember if he saw stars when he was in space. So, yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, the fact that he would speak like that, he was definitely trying to get a message across to us, right?
Oh, exactly. And that's why I thought, well, I should basically tell the story of how I got involved in this then, because that's really where a lot of this comes from my aspect. So I would say back in, it was probably about 1987 when I was reading through the book Man or Matter, and got quite interested in atmospheric color formation as per Goethe's theory of color, where light's just not, what they call Rayleigh scattering, but it's actually darkness coming through a lighted sort of medium. And there's an experiment which I've never performed, but I actually understand it, and I've seen it in certain effects. And that is we actually need a jug of water, something to stir into it that makes it opaque gradually as you stir it in and stays in suspension, and a light bulb, like a basic tungsten filament light, and a black card. So basically the experiment is you put the light bulb behind the jar of water, you start stirring in the medium, and it goes from yellow to red as it gets thicker, which is like the sun going down the atmosphere. But then for the blue side, basically put the black card behind and you shine the light from the side and basically see black, and as you start making the medium, the liquid medium more opaque, it starts going blue and goes towards violet. So I was thinking, well, this would be an interesting experiment. I'd like to reproduce it authentically. So I called up NASA, and I said, yeah, I'm a researcher in atmospheric optics, and I was actually hoping to find out what the dominant spectra of the sun is in the optical wavelengths above the atmosphere. And they're going, no, we don't have that information. I'm going, yeah, come on, man. It's like you've been up there for a long time. It was like about 25 years at that time. And I'm saying, you know, Skylab, you had all that equipment up there. You go, no, we don't have that information. I said, well, how about just a white light photo of the sun in space? I can just use it as like a experimental reference, so at least, you know, got some authenticity to the experiment. Go, nope, we don't have any of those either. I go, how about pictures of stars, white light pictures of stars? Nope, we don't have any. And I was rather puzzled by this, although I had heard, because I remember I came across in one of Wilhelm Reich's writings, and I haven't been able to retrace that reference, but he spoke about how space would probably be black, and that stellar light would be what he called orgone illumination of the atmosphere. And also, Dinshaw Ghadiali, the great color healer who developed the spectrochrome system, he also said that space would be black and that the stars would appear on the atmosphere. So this comes out of sort of like old occult sort of tradition. So I started thinking, well, maybe there's something to all this. So I thought, well, this is a rather curious sort of affair. So NASA did actually send me a lot of stuff, and I did, like, here's sort of like old envelopes from NASA that the guy started sending me these various pictures, and I believe that we have a picture here, which I could perhaps put up. They sent me a number of
what?
Of photos. It's one that's called S73-3378 scan.
Yes, I see it.
Yeah. Let's see.
That?
Can you get that one up, or do you want me?
I've got it up right now.
Oh, yep, there it is. Okay, now what we see here on this picture is that this is basically, you know, from the back of the photo, this solar eruption of, is that the one? Yeah, solar eruption of June 10th, 1973, seen as the spectroheliogram obtained during the first manned Skylab mission, Skylab 2. The SO-82A experiment, an Apollo telescope mount component covering the wavelength region from 150 to 650 angstroms. That's the extreme ultraviolet. Solid disk to center was produced from 304 angstrom ultraviolet light from helium plus ions. So what we're looking at here is, this is a spectroheliogram, but it's only showing the you know, the visible disk at one wavelength, which is sort of like ionized helium. So that's actually rather curious. If we can, let me see if I can show this here.
Do you see my screen here? There's quite a bit of stuff on it.
Yeah. I see yours. So I put mine up here. I'm not sure which one of us is controlling this, but here, here's just a basic spectroheliogram of the sun and the optical wavelengths from Earth. Right? You see all these little lines, these dark lines. Well, where those dark lines are at, that's what images the sun in outer space. So when you go and you look at all these pictures of the sun taken from space, they're usually in the extreme ultraviolet, but you can get like hydrogen alpha. So they actually, where you get a black line here, the absorption lines, that's what they're imaging the sun in, and that's what we can see on that other picture. Is that let's go back to this other picture again here. No, it's not. Yes, typical Hangout stuff. We won't worry about. But if you can put that picture back up there, Tech, then what you can see is you can. And there's the reason there's two pictures is the other one here, the S73, the one that doesn't say scan. Okay, I believe this one looks like it's going to come up. There we go. You can see it a bit better. This is actually, I found this on the web. The first one is a scan of the picture that they sent me, the print. Now here's an enhanced one, which is actually available now on the web. But you can see where the solar disk is basically only appearing at certain wavelengths. And this is why, you know, if you go to like the NASA sites, you know, like the SOHO real-time MPEG movies and stuff. Here is where these are just basically all, you know, 171 angstroms, 195 angstroms, 284. It only appears at certain wavelengths, and this is what's really curious about it. You know, the thing's not, and it's appearing in the absorption band wavelengths. So nonetheless, this is what NASA was sending me. Not these beautiful color pictures. You know, we didn't have the internet in those days. You know, you had to like make a phone call or write a letter and wait for the things to show up. We didn't have the advantage that we have today of being able to stream all this information. So anyway, the gentleman at the Johnson Space Center got quite interested in this himself. He thought this was very curious. You couldn't. So to track it down, he actually tracked down a man that worked for 25 years in the photographic department of NASA and put me in touch with him. And the guy actually called me for a chat. And it was funny. He was a pretty knowledgeable guy because I was living in Northern California at the time. And he's going, "Where do you live?" I go, "A little place up in Northern California." He goes, "No, name it." I go, "Whitethorn." He goes, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "You're up by the Usal Road," which is a road along through the Sinkyone Wilderness. Pretty amazing road. He goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah." He says, "We used to like go over all the like photographs and look for cool roads to go drive," and that was one of the cool roads. So I thought, oh, this guy's pretty clued up. But yeah, he started. So he told me that, yeah, he said it was a big puzzle when they first went up, that they could hardly see the stars. And he said they started developing specialized diffraction gratings. You know, so basically when Alan Shepard, Virgil Grissom went up, they couldn't see any stars, is what he reported to me. So they started developing diffraction gratings. He said they could start seeing higher order stars, but he didn't know where that went. It became compartmentalized. So anyway, I like to double check on things. So I called up Naval Research Labs in Washington, you know, the Solar Research Center there, and started talking to this guy. And I'm saying, "Yeah, how come you can't see the stars in space?" And he's going, "Who told you that?" He said, I said, "NASA." He said, "Oh, that's some boys down at Goddard pulling your leg." I'm going, "No, man, this is like public relations down in Johnson Space Center." He's going, "Well, I don't know why they tell you that." He says, "Because you can see the stars in space." He said, "And here's my," he put me on to John Bartow, who was his research assistant. And, you know, John was basically up on the first Challenger. And, you know, he's basically payload specialist, so he ran something called Space Lab 2. So, you know, he spacewalked, he was out there. And so I'm talking to him, he's going, "Yeah, look," he said, "the stars in space." He goes, "I don't know why NASA would tell you that." He said, "The stars in space are they're brighter and they don't twinkle." I'm going, "Oh, cool, that makes sense. I really appreciate that. Thank you." So I called back my contact in NASA. I'm going, "Hey, look, man, I just talked to an astronaut, and he told me he could see the stars in space." And I go, "Well, he's a scientist and a trained observer, and he accurately reported his experiences." They said, "But the information we gave you is correct." I think, well, okay, maybe they finished these secret diffraction gratings and stuff. Maybe they're in all the optics and stuff that go up. And that's what's interesting in that one clip of the Patrick Moore interview with the astronauts, which anybody can find on YouTube. Just, you know, type in Patrick Moore asks 11 crew about seeing the stars, and the video will show up. And one of them, I think it was Collins, he goes, "Oh, maybe we could see it through the optics." You know, it's like, well, they did have some sort of optics and things. But heavens knows what in the world these things were. So anyway, one day I was driving around California, and I was listening to radio station KGO out there, talk radio, which I had been on a few times over various borderland topics. And they had this guy, Andy Fracknoy, who at the time, and may still be, I don't know, was the head of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. And he's always one of these sort of debunkers, and space is just dirty, comets are dirty snowballs, that sort of stuff. And a know-it-all sort of guy. So I thought, oh, this would be fun. Call in. It was before a day's cell phone, so I pulled over. I saw a gas station, so I pulled over and slugged a few quarters into the payphone and called KGO and got on. And within a minute, I'm here chatting to this guy. I'm going, "Yeah, how come you can't see the stars in space?" And he's going, "No, you can." He goes, "Where did you get that idea?" I said, "From NASA." I go, "No. What?" So they hung up on me and they go, "No, we get these calls." And I'm listening to him. And he's going, "Oh, look, he was telling the audience that I got pictures of stars in space hanging on my wall that were gifts from astronauts." So I called back to NASA on that one and asked my contact. I said, "Look, I just talked to this head of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, and he said he's got pictures on his wall that are photos of stars taken from space by astronauts." And the guy's going, "Well, I don't know where he got them from." He says, "Because there are no pictures from stars in white light taken by astronauts." And that's why I had the NASA catalogs, which I showed earlier. There are no pictures of stars. They had some sort of extreme ultraviolet stellar thing on NASA, but I wasn't able to find actually any of the. On Skylab, I wasn't able to find any of the photos of that. You'd think that, let's think of it this way: like, you're going up in space, and what's the first thing you do? Hey, look, stars, they're brighter up here. There's the moon, there's the planets. How many hours of space shuttle footage have you watched or seen? They actually turn the camera over and go, "Hey, look over there, there's the moon, there's some stars." Now they're taking pictures of stars from the International Space Station, but they certainly weren't at the time. And let me see if I can put up this picture here.
Which one?
Here's the only white light photo I was able to find of the sun from space. And this is a coronagraph. So the sun is blocked out. And here we see the corona. And this will be like polished steel or aluminum. So it's a reflection. So this is the only white light photo I was able to find from that period, as well as other coronagraphs in books, but this was the actual one from Skylab. So here we have reflection. So obviously they're reflecting. Oh, and one of the other things that was told to me by the, let me figure out how to stop sharing this here. This gentleman that worked for the photographic department was then in private practice, so I guess he could talk. He told me, he said, well, he said it was weird. He said the guy, it always puzzled him that the astronauts told him that, well, you could see, they could see the sun. He said they were ordered not to look at it, because of the intensity of the optical radiation and potentially other radiation. He said, but they're in these little tin cans with little windows, so you can obviously they could see it. But he said, yeah, they could sort of see it, and he said it was weird. They could see the brightness of the sun on the window, but it was like they were looking through it, and they could see this darkish, more brownish red body behind it, as though. And I believe we have this picture here. Could you put that picture up, Tech, of the one from Koresh's book, if we can get that picture up there?
Sure. This one?
No, the one that I had you invert so that we could. That one will work, but doesn't. We don't have the detail. That one, if you could, blow that one up a bit. And what we see in there is. So this is from, Koresh's cellular cosmogony, where he claims we live on the inside of the Earth. But what's interesting about it is he shows the visible light. The sun actually appears in the upper atmosphere, and that's what we're looking at in this diagram here. And I've wondered about that. We looked at, there's various things like, Professor Auguste Piccard, whose brother John Piccard was actually potentially the name,
Star Trek?
the namesake for John Picard from Star Trek.
Jean-Luc Picard.
So Jean-Luc Picard, right. So Auguste Picard and his brother John Picard, they actually were working on balloons. So Auguste went up back in the 30s. Here it is. Here we say this is just world record for manned balloon ascent is presently 22 miles, where the air pressure is 1/50th of its value. But as a child, I was very aware of the record-breaking balloon flights being made by John and, this is Jeanette, but it should be Auguste Picard. In 1934, they reached an altitude of 11 miles. Later, Life magazine ran a photo they'd taken of one of their flights. It showed inky black sky above and the arc of Earth's horizon in the distance. And I'd come across that reference younger where somebody was quoting Picard, claiming that, you know, he was surprised when he got up that sky turned black. He was actually expecting to see stars and stuff. And you can see that too, that gentleman that jumped out of the thing last year, Felix Baumgartner. Yeah, so you definitely, and there's a few videos which we can't play here because we haven't sort of keyed up of. There's some guys over in Italy that have been sending GoPro cameras up as high as they can. I think like like 30 kilometers or something like that, 15 miles. Space definitely gets black. You don't really see the stars. But I thought perhaps it would be good to maybe read through what some of the astronauts have said here. So what I will do is cue this up and read some of this here. So Buzz Aldrin, while riding Apollo 11 on its way to the moon, he spoke about the aircraft's induced rotation around its longitudinal axis. The only consolation was the magnificence of the visual spectacle that paraded past their portals during every roll, what Aldrin calls an incredible panorama every 2 minutes as the sun, moon, and Earth appeared in our windows one at a time. There was no mention of stars or planets. His partner Neil Armstrong is also quoted, "The sky is black, you know. It's a very dark sky." Okay, and then here's on Gemini 10 mission, while spacewalking, Collins noted, "My God, the stars are everywhere, above me, on all sides, even below me somewhat. Down there, next to that obscure horizon, the stars are bright, and they are steady." And then by the time he gets to the Aegina, which is the lunar thing, the stars are gone. 3 years later, on his way to the moon in Apollo 11, he writes, "I can't see the Earth, only the black, starless sky behind the Aegina." The next page is, "I slowly cartwheeled away from the Aegina. I see nothing but the black sky for several seconds." 150 pages later, he also writes, "What I see is disappointing, for only the brightest stars are visible through the telescope, and it is difficult to recognize them when they are not accompanied by the dimmer stars." That's an incredible statement. Our normal stars seen clearly through a thick atmosphere here on Earth by the naked eye were so dim in space that even a telescope fails to reveal them. All I conclude is that star blindness must be like malaria. You are subject to unpredictable random attacks of star blindness when you are in zero gravity. This is written by Ralph Renee, who passed away a few years ago, from his book NASA Moon to America.
That's a great book title.
It is, yeah. No, so I corresponded with Ralph back in the day.
Corresponded with everyone.
Yeah, well, I was put in touch with him from Tom Valentine, who was doing Radio Free America, because he was putting Ralph on as well, so he put us in touch. So nevertheless, as Apollo 11 capsule round the moon, the situation changed. As Apollo 11 commander Neil Armstrong, by far the most laconic member of the crew, was also moved to comment, "Houston, it's been a real change for us. Now we are able to see the stars again and recognize constellations for the first time on the trip. The sky is filled with stars, just like nights out on Earth." So this is supposedly when they get behind the moon, they can see stars, but they couldn't see them before.
When they get behind the moon?
Yeah. Okay, so then once they rounded the moon, once again, the situation brings forth this comment from Mike Collins. "Outside my window, I can see stars, and that is all. Where I know the moon to be, there is simply a black void. The moon's presence is defined slowly by the absence of stars." So more confusion emerges as we read the following explanatory note by Collins. "Toward the sun, nothing can be seen but its blinding disk, whereas down sun there is simply a black void. The stars are there, but they cannot be seen because with sunlight flooding the spacecraft, the pupil of the eye involuntarily contracts, and the light from the stars is too dim to compete with reflected sunlight, as both enter the eye through the tiny aperture formed by the contracted pupil. No, to see the stars, the pupil must be allowed to relax, to open wide enough to let the starlight form a visible image on the retina, and that can be done by blocking out the sunlight. Then they rig plates over the windows, and he reports, under these conditions, the eye slowly adapts itself, and the brighter stars gradually emerge from the void. 14 years later, Collins wrote another book. The writing is so different from his first one that one would almost think it was written by someone else, or at least another ghostwriter. In it, he proclaims, "My God, the stars are everywhere, even below me. They are somewhat brighter than on Earth." Towards the end of that book, he declares, "Never a day without sunshine or a night without stars. Fat, unblinking stars." Okay, so, right, they're everywhere. You can't see them, but they're everywhere. That's the same guy reporting that. Okay, here's Apollo 14 mission. The astronauts had a hard time seeing the stars, even with the help of a special monocular used to supplement the scanning telescope and the sextant. Due to the absence of an atmosphere to refract and filter light, the stars do not twinkle in cislunar space. Rather, as Stu Russo puts it, the stars look like little points of light or fuzzy little dots. On the same mission, Bruce's crewmate Ed, this very eerie feeling. You suddenly start to recognize that, yeah, you're in deep space, that the planets are just that, planets. You're not really connected to anything anymore, that you're floating through this deep black void. Well, what, are the stars everywhere, or is it a deep black void? That would be nice to know. Here we go. Here, Stu Russo again. The dim light photography was very complicated because you had to do it in total blackness. The blackest you can ever put a human being in without closing him in an absolute black room. You have no earth light. You have no sunlight. You have no reflected light bending the corners anywhere. It is black, black. Now, I mean, I've been out in the desert and the wilderness, and you know, on New Moon, and the stars are bright. You can actually see the starlight. So if they're brighter up there, how come it's so black? Gene Cernan on Apollo 17 talked about star blindness. When sunlight comes in through the blackness of space, it's black. I didn't say it's dark. I said black. So black you can't even conceive how black it is in your mind. The sunlight doesn't strike anything, so all you see is black. So here's Yuri Gagarin, first Russian cosmonaut, who says, "The flight, astonishingly bright, cold stars could be seen through the windows." Yes. That's pretty good. I want to show here at the end. Let me flip down. So what? Here we go. Ralph made this lovely little device here. So for looking at the stars, so you can see here where he would look through a star like this, and you could have the sun coming through, or you know, he was doing it with the light to show how it would work. But basically, nothing could really stop him from seeing the stars at night, you know, shining light in the different sort of sides. So kind of pointing out what the astronauts were saying doesn't really work in actual practice if you make a little device. So here's what we go to. So basically, you know, what was reported to me by John Bartow ties in with what the Soviet astronaut said. So why would NASA tell me you can't see the stars and they had to develop special diffraction gratings? And why get guys like Collins, you know, so space is all black, but there's stars everywhere, you know, depends on when he was writing it. So there seems to be a bit of confusion about it. In fact, now so we're not saying there aren't stars up there, we're just saying that we're not getting straight answer on what's happening until we actually get up there. So my suspicion has been, is that you can't see the stars directly just through plain glass, that you need some sort of atmosphere or reflective surface. Otherwise, there'd be, you know, there's stars in the star catalog now, but there weren't any before the space station.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Reading Etheric Formative Forces by Rudolf Steiner, he talks, I think he devotes almost a whole chapter to what happens when sunlight hits the ozone layer and how it's required as just raw sunlight would destroy the eye. do you think what's happening to convert sunlight or starlight into visible light is happening in the ozone layer? Is that where the mystery lies? Or
Well, it could well be. I mean, if something happening, because if you watch a sunset with some clouds, and you look at the angle of the sun, right? You see if the sun's 93 million miles away and just getting light straight down, if it's just photons flinging through space, being spewed by some nuclear reaction or something, you just can get down. But if you actually look at, everybody's seen that, the angle, and you can actually triangulate that. I think it works out to like 30 miles or something up where the actual angle is from of the sun. So there it is, right? And of course, that sort of thing that was covered by Koresh and others that, are going, wait a minute, what's really going on here? So just sort of calculate that the next time you get an opportunity to watch a sunset coming through the stars and you see the angle. Just, if you can figure out where on the map the 2 points are where it's hitting, and it's just simple geometry to figure out where in the world.
So basically, what we're seeing, whatever that is much, much closer than we think it is. 30 miles up, that's not far at all, if you think about it. I mean, but if you would go 30 miles up, how high does a plane go at 11,000 meters? That's
about. I think they're 30. I think they're about 5-6 miles up. I mean, because they fly over what's that? Everest. It's about 5 miles. I can't remember, 30,000 feet.
Okay.
So yeah, you're up in that range there. So I obviously still see the sun, and we don't know. I mean, here's what are truth protective layers? I mean, who actually goes up? I was always suspicious. When the Challenger flew, I was always wondering what was going to happen letting civilians up in space, right? Because that sort of put the kibosh on civilians going into space. Let's see, that's why I was like Riley Crabb, who ran Borderlands before me for 25 years, right? And he used to give lectures on like UFOs and the Kabbalah. And he used to talk about, well, going to the moon, that's sort of like traveling the 32nd path on the tree of life, right? It's like, if you're supposed to do it, sort of like spiritually, but if you sort of drag your carcass along it, it's going to like bring the mind up to these higher dimensions anyway. So he saw space travel as a way of basically opening up these higher pathways to people. Of course,
a question for you. We're going to a real special place right now, so let's get to some really heretical, crazy talk, which I know you're the one that got me on this track, so you have only yourself to blame for me even asking this question. The pre-Copernican notions of cosmology, especially in the Middle Ages and even before that, time of Jesus, think about that, 2,000 years ago, they believed in 7 heavens, meaning 7 celestial spheres above us, and the moon was associated with the first one. Venus, I believe, is associated with the second one, and so on and so forth until you get to Mars is associated with Mars is associated with the 5th. The Sun is associated with the 4th. Mercury, it's the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn in the 7th heaven, right? So that's the order that they're in. And you look at the diagrams drawn out by Tycho Brahe, etc. Even Kepler in his work Harmonies of the World, Harmonies Mundi, those are the diagrams that they use. There was no Uranus or Neptune. So, and a lot of ecclesiastical traditions, including Christian and Muslim traditions, they believe that the moon is the first heaven. So, like the prophet Adam is supposed to be up there. Like he's hanging out there. I don't know which angel is in there. They mention in the Zohar, but what you're saying, what Riley Crabb was saying, makes sense. Like when you die, you go up there, right? And you're trying to just get up there right now in the living state.
Exactly. I mean well, yeah. I mean, what we hear, we were either just like meat puppets that just happened just by chance because of the only miracle that science allows, the old Big Bang, and everything else from there, it just sort of happened by chance, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, you're an idiot if you question that, because you know this smug guys at the top figured it all out. So you just like pay your taxes and keep your mouth shut, because that's sort of like the underlying theme of this sort of orthodox point of view. But space is obviously more multidimensional, and that's one of the things that I've come to consider. Well, obviously, it seems that, you know, you can see the stars to a certain extent and possibly adjust to it. It might actually, you know, obviously they don't see them when they first go up. They need to adjust their eyes, and even then we wonder, but we wonder if all these guys actually went up. There's some good questions with that. But the thing is obviously it's not photons flinging through space. This whole concept of these things are just nuclear furnaces and they're flinging out photons are spraying endlessly in space, and we just happen to get some hitting us. I mean, just think of all the wasted nonsense energy in the universe if that's what's happening. I mean, it's so illogical that some divine creative force that has the capacity to put something together that would actually have at least semi-intelligent beings like us wandering, you know, the Earth plane here. You would think that there'd be some logic and order to the whole process. It wouldn't just be some random stuff that just accidentally happened. And in that sense, then what we have to look at is the light coming from stars. It's not just photons randomly spraying in space, you know, going on for like, you know, light years, even up to like billions of light years for the alleged quasar distances. The thing is we're dealing with longitudinal transmissions, which is extraluminal, right? It doesn't take any time. The universe is in real time. When I realized that, I could actually feel it. I look up. I mean, I'll often talk to people at night because it's amazing. Nobody looks up at the stars, or very, very few people, and
Especially
very
now
few people.
that we have GPS.
Oh, exactly. Very few people can actually identify. You know, like I'll be out in the evening with people. I go, "Oh, look, there's a galactic center up there," and they go, "How do you know?" I go, "'Cause it's right there. You look." It's like not too hard to see, right there between Scorpio and Sagittarius. See those stars there? And there's like, hey, there's like Saturn and Mars out in front.
But
I go, how do you know? I go, because it's, how could you not know? There they are, right in front of you.
it's amazing, though, that anywhere you are in the world, you see the galactic center at night?
Well, it depends on what time of year it is and where you're at in the cycle of precession of aeons as far as the season. And that's why, because basically now, and that was what the whole 2012 thing was, is the December solstice sun is conjuncting the galactic center. So yeah, right now, so that's a summertime constellation in the northern hemisphere and a winter constellation in the southern, and the opposite. Because I remember, you know, growing up in Chicago when we were young in the winter, I used to use Orion, was sort of like our timing device and knowing when to come in, because didn't wear watches, you know, just knew when, you know, get out on like, you know, Saturday evening and go out. We had to be in about 11ish before midnight, and I could usually tell by Orion's place in the sky when to be in, and I was usually pretty correct. But now that's a summer constellation here in the southern hemisphere, and of course it's upside down.
I really need you to, I would love it if you would clear something up for me, because this is, I don't know much
Sure.
about cosmology, but when I look at the stars and I look at those time lapses, right? Well, I can't see stars up here. I'm in New York City. We can't see anything up there except Polaris. That's one. We got one star we can see.
Yeah.
It moves. That's it. So I see in the time lapses, everything is moving. It almost looks like a disco ball spinning up there. You know, everything is moving like that. So to me, if we're on a planet that's moving, that's spinning like this at 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, and then spinning around the sun at 53,000 miles per hour, and then the sun is moving around some galactic center at some ungodly speed, plus all those other stars are doing the same thing, and I look up there and I see everything moving in a very orderly spinning type motion all the time, every night. It should be a mixed mash of everything up there. You know, whether they're 5 trillion years away or 5 years away, it doesn't really matter. You know, so that doesn't make any sense. And then like you read how Halton Arp's work about the parallax of the stars. Something I would really like you to explain. Like when they say parallax, What exactly do they mean, and why is that important?
Okay, well, that starts out after the basically the Copernican revolution, right? Because before that, everybody experienced that they were in the center of the universe, right? The sun rose in the east, set in the west. Plants follow. You have the solar tropisms of plants, even like sunflowers. They basically, the head of the sunflower follows the sun. One of the reasons they call it a sunflower. But then when Copernicus supposedly discovered that the Earth went around the sun, which he really didn't, because that came out of Arabic sciences, and he even copied the exact same sort of letter configurations in his diagrams, and only just converted them from Arabic into Roman characters. But all that really happened in there is was a reduction of the complex motions to their lowest common denominator. And in that sense, while I'm talking here, I'll see if I can actually can show what these complex motions are here. Because like Venus shows basically over 8 years, Venus creates a 5-pointed star. And here we go. Let me see. I'll find the Venus one here, and I should be able to.
Yeah, like a peach blossom. Yeah.
Yeah. They're all okay. Let me see. Let's share this here, so our watchers can watch this thing here. Okay, so this is basically Venus over time. Earth is in the center. This is the sun here going around, and that's Venus is making the pattern. So all the planets make these patterns, and each planet has a different pattern. And the planetary loops are planetary flowers. Venus just happens to make the pentagram, which is what So this is golden ratio, right? 5 to 8. Makes the 5 points in 8 years. And that's our relationship to it. So this is what we experience. And this signature of Venus, we see this in various flowers and fruits. You cut an apple, on its horizontal, counter to its axis, and you see the 5-point star in there. You see them in papayas. You see it in many flowers. And this has always been taken to be the doctrine of signatures, that this is where these patterns actually come from, which of course then it would mean that they'd have to be happening on Earth, because this is being woven around, and we get these patterns from all the different planets. So let's see, here's let's go here, let's put Mercury up there for a minute and see. Okay, so basically that's just, so this is what people experienced, was these things. But now if you reduce these to their lowest common denominator mathematically, then you basically get, the sun in the center with the planets going around, which is basically Kepler's harmony of the spheres, which the Platonic solids sort of fit in there, and it's a logical pattern. And it makes sense. So, but it took a while for people to actually figure out, to believe it, because they go, whatever, nobody's experiencing the Earth going around the sun. In fact, we still don't experience the Earth going around the sun. Only, not physically, only in our imagination. We still experience ourselves being in what we call the Tychonian universe, right? We are in the center as far as our biological units are concerned. It's only in our minds do we conceive these other patterns.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
Okay, so here we go into Mars. So basically, to get back to your question, so if the Earth is going around the sun and the sun's going around the Earth, it was proposed by a Jesuit priest by the name of Boscovich that, well, it'd be very simple. So what you do is you set up sighting telescopes. And, you sight a star, fill it with water, measure the angle of aberration. 6 months later, you reproduce the experiment. The change in angle of aberration is caused by the great distance that the sun's traveled in 6 months to get to the other side of the sun. You measure the angle change, and it basically, you figure out that's parallax. That's how you figure out what's happening with the that gives you your distance. I was just looking for a book here, which I haven't been able to find, called De Labore Solis, or Airy's Failure Reconsidered, and there was actually a book written about this whole process. And what thing was is it was actually performed by George Airy, who I think was he took over after Edmund Halley at Greenwich. He was a royal astronomer, so he actually reproduced these experiments. And lo and behold, there was no parallax, which was a big puzzle, because the whole point of the experiment was to decide whether or not the sun was going around the Earth or the Earth was going around the sun. And the results of the experiments were such that indicated that the sun was going around the Earth. That was basically, but of course nobody wanted to believe that, because by that time, 100 years after sort of Copernicus, everybody just figured, well, everybody believed that, that the heliocentric model. So this actually gave rise to the ether drift experiments, because here's what's happening. So right here, you have the sun, and the Earth is going around. So if the light looks the same here as over here, you're not getting any angle change. That means that the stellar light is actually following the Earth around. This is what they mean by bent space, this whole space-time thing and the gravity well, and it's pulling it in, and it's all relative, right? Because it doesn't matter where you're at, it's just going to come on down. And so that they came up with this theory. So basically relativity is a denial of the proof that we're in the center, if you want to look at it from that logical perspective.
And I do.
Not saying that's the only logical perspective, that's just that logical perspective.
Absolutely, that's nothing relative about that. So explain that.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Explain that to us again, just because it's such an important thing. The ether drift, there was such an immense effort to suppress the existence of the ether. The first Michelson and Morley experiment, there's a lot of controversy around that. And before we get into the details of that experiment, why, again, did they have to bring in relativity and replace the ether? What were they so afraid of? You just said it, but if you could just summarize it and give us a little more detail on that, just so, I'm a little dense. I need a little more. Explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old.
Yeah, well, that's something I've often wondered. It seems, and that's why I've tried to understand kind of where Steiner was coming from and what he called this like anti-evolutionary element, which was involved in ensuring man's descent into matter. And because at the same time that these things were happening, there was also these great sort of natural scientists that were around, even Tesla for that matter. So why in the world would they suppress the ether? We could look at Wilhelm Reich, right? It's where there's this characterological armoring of the dominator system, which we sort of term the patriarchy. That when the life force hits it, it sort of retracts because it's not used to it, because there is this sort of anti-life element within it, which is where Reich came up with his like mass psychology of fascism thesis, is that the way that the nuclear family is set up as a dominator system, it actually eventually leads to fascist societies, which is very possible. Look at the way the world's going right now. If America's not turning into a fascist society, there is no such thing. It's actually scary how this is going, and people are going along. But this is because of the characterological reactions en masse. So in that sense, that's what Trevor Constable used to say, that when he'd present his work in weather engineering, using etheric transmitters, as he said, people would PhDs would recoil from it, because it dealt with the life energy. So the actual reason why people didn't want to admit the ether and basically look for excuses to run around it that's a good question. Whether it's from the characterological thing or there was as sort of from Jerry Vassilatos's ray of discovery thesis that the desperate financiers rushed to suppress any sort of discoveries or ideas that would open people up to a freer form of living that couldn't be controlled, by the dark forces. So actually, why? Yeah, I don't know. That's a philosophical question, that could be debated. That I've sort of given the sort of idea streams that I've sort of tried to think through.
Yeah,
The fact is,
you made a great case for the relativity being basically an extension of solipsism. Philosophically, it's meant to destroy a belief in an absolute truth, thus an attack against God, and that's understood. Scientifically, though, it accomplishes something else as well. It's like, how do I put this? They're trying to get rid of the ether. Why? Okay, there's the philosophical thing, but also what it will unleash as far as science goes. Because if the ether exists and those ether drift experiments worked, it's going to show that the ether is not moving, right? Or that the Earth is, and that takes us to the fact that the heretical idea that the Earth is not moving, right?
Right. And that is a heretical idea, but then if we look at sort of Jerry's articles on eidetic geocentrism,
Jerry Vassilatos,
yes. Which I've posted, and he's actually pointing out, just even if you get in a plane, or in a fast-moving car, and just any sort of motion this way or that way, you feel it. Well, if we're sort of like spinning through space, then that should add to it, just the logic of it. All our sensations and all the sort of scientific data indicates that we're basically sitting still. But yet it does appear that we are going around the sun. And of course, this, for me, I had to start thinking, well, there's different belief systems here. So I would meditate on being in one system or the other. And that's where I finally came up with what I call my four-world theory. And that I had to accept that there's different layers of space. So potentially there is, Earth is going around the sun. That appears to be like the skeleton of the system, the bare bones. But on top of that, we have this higher order projection. Looking at it from the electrical universe sort of thesis, and that everything's electrical, which we now know because it's all pretty much easily tested in the lab, and we've seen plasmas and things that show how it works and totally makes sense.
So the sun is not a huge nuclear furnace up in the sky, right?
I seriously doubt that.
Yeah, so
for many reasons. One is that the model doesn't work, and they keep trying to patch on nonsense to it, like dark matter and this and that, and all things you see and have to believe in, whereas in the electrical universe theory, everything's reproducible, and you can actually predict things from it, which are then found to be true.
Yeah.
But I look at it from even higher order than that, and just
this one researcher, Wild Heretic, I don't know if you've heard of him. He does absolutely brilliant research-loaded articles, and he likened he did an article on the sun, and he likened it to a sulfur lamp, which is a recent kind of innovation. In the past 20 years, they've really made it ideal and affordable, and they work great and they last forever. Sulfur lamps.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, I've come across that Wild Heretic. I couldn't say I agree with all his ideas, but I like the fact that he was thinking freely.
Oh, yeah, he lives up to his name for sure. He's working on a huge new article, too, which I can't wait to see, I think.
Well, I think what's important when we look at people like that, because I know one of his things is he's trying to say like the atmosphere is like this glass ceiling and you can't penetrate it. And
that's another guy. Yeah, it's another guy which we won't talk about. He's.
Oh, okay, that wasn't the Wild Heretic. I read so much of this stuff. Well, the thing is, I'll read people's stuff like that, and it's like when people go, "Oh, that guy's a fool." He's not. I go, whatever. He's got a worldview. Try to put yourself in that mind and just think like them and accept it for a moment. You don't have to believe it. It's just that, you should have the flexibility of consciousness to be able to think why they're thinking that, and see if there actually is anything useful in there that you can extract back into your particular thing.
Absolutely.
And that's why I started out having the multiple belief systems, the geocentric and heliocentric, which in the etheric formative forces in cosmos, earth, and man, Gunter Vaxmuth actually has one diagram where he overlaps the geocentric and heliocentric. We may have even shown that in a different hangout. I don't have it queued up here. But that was, I started realizing that both spaces exist. There's no doubt about it. That the geocentric, or more properly anthropocentric, is a higher order space. Space isn't purely just this vast empty thing going on forever. And even relativity sort of explains it, this curved space-time, right? They sort of try to explain it in sort of a soulless sort of fashion. But in a way, Steiner was saying the same thing with projective geometry, that a line going off to the left will return from the right. That's the nature of this higher order space. And everything's projective out there because, as we know, space isn't 3D. You can use 3 dimensions out in space to measure, deal with things, and it does seem to be certain characteristics, but 3D space is subjective. That's our internal space, and that's what Steiner said, that was one of the gravest errors of man's descent into matter, was the moving of the Cartesian coordinate systems from the subjective to the objective. Because we know space is one dimension, it's space, and it's functions on projective or synthetic geometry. Synthetic geometry being basically the same thing, and that's what Steinmetz used synthetic geometry to crack the Tesla patents. So that's how it functions out here. But then again, these stars in space, so they're not getting any parallax. Well, even now they get this like super minor parallax with super sensitive equipment. And of course, they've had to rejig all their theories and things on it. So potentially there is some motion.
What is
we have to keep our
parallax? Just give us like a really simple layman's explanation.
That was like what I was saying. If you're going from one side to the other, the parallax is the angle change. That's all it means. So you're just looking for the change in angle as the Earth moves through space. So you can geometrically.
That's between objects that are different distances apart, right? Like when you're people. Yeah, people who play video games might notice this, like parallax scrolling, like when you're playing Super Mario Kart or whatever, and you're walking through the screen. The mountains are moving a lot slower than the trees that are closer to you, right? So that's like parallax scrolling. It's the difference between like speed and angles. Is that
right? Well, that's pretty much the same thing you would think, because yeah. In that sense, right, the Earth is like, the foreground and the sky is the background, right? So they're moving, so you measure, the angle at different things. So you can have the parallax between just two things. The first one's moving and the second one's supposedly still.
Yeah.
And, to test it at different times. So, right, what you said about the parallax scrolling, right, that's pretty much the same concept.
So it seems to me by studying this parallax is that we're not moving, but something up there is moving, and how do I put this? It's whatever that field is of stars that we see moving. It almost seems like it's extremely small, that field. Like it's not some vast, massive thing. The way it's spinning around itself, it seems like it's really small and being projected out. I don't know how to describe it.
It's like it's a sphere, right, rotating around the Earth. When that's fundamentally where, we get all these old sort of ideas of the crystal sphere. Basically all the pre-Copernican diagrams showed, Earth in the center with the, different spheres going out, with the crystalline sphere of the stars being on the outermost, because, they all see, the planets are obviously moving, those don't move. But that could be energetically. This we get into like the quantized redshifts. This was, of course, one of the puzzles. As they started discovering, the so-called, Hubble constant, which is the shift in, the redshift. You could basically graph it out, the redshift of different stars, and which made it seem like the universe was expanding because they're all like pretty much redshifted. But then with the galaxies, when they started doing the redshift, it was interesting that they actually go in stages. So the redshifts, there isn't a smooth curve. You find that there's stages, and of course some of the creationists have used this, say, well, you know, it's like they're actually in concentric spheres around the Earth. And it's interesting that mathematically, you know, with the redshifts, it does seem as though Earth is in the center, and that these things are. But then again, once looking at Halt and Arp's work, and you realize that the redshifts don't denote distance, but energetic state, then that means we don't actually know what distance they are. But energetically, they're in spheres around the Earth. So in that sense, sure, there is, in these higher order spaces, these things basically are operating like that. You know, and that's why, in fact, that'll be one of the next one or two hangouts we do, is we'll really get into this four-world thing in a much greater depth, to so people can understand it. Yeah, but basically,
what are the four worlds? Super simple.
Super simple. Well, the four worlds of the Kabbalah, we could look at them. You have first the, you know, out of sort of the nothingness, the Ein Sof and Ein Sof Or, which is like nothing, limitless light, limitless darkness, kind of come together and create, you know, this, you know, the first sort of formative particle, tether, which is the unfolding of the tree of life. But it actually happens in sort of four worlds, as they say. So it's kind of four trees, which we see sort of branched out into like the four suits of the tarot, or the four elements, you know, earth, water, fire, air, etc. But in the Kabbalah, we have them like the archetypal, the generative, the formative, and the manifest. So if we look at them in a simple form, the manifest is let's call it the heliocentric model, or the acentric, because the sun's just a random blip flipping through the you know, the universe. It's not centered anyway, but as far as we're concerned, it's our center because we're going around it. So that's the manifest world, the physical world, in essence. But then we have the formative world above that, and the formative world is the one that I was showing in these diagrams. You know, let's in fact, let me see if I can come back over to
the Kabbalah is very deep and interesting. I tried to read the Zohar, but this is not like a weekend thing.
All right. There we go. See, because here we, here's Mars, right? So here's Mars around Earth. It's just been running in the background. So there's the formative world. You see these patterns that the planets are actually forming around Earth. And what you find is in books like, you know, Kranich's Cosmological Botany, that these patterns actually weave themselves into the plant world. And plants that sort of like traditionally in herbology are attributed to planets actually have the signatures of the planetary motions in them. So this is a very real formative world. As I say, we'll get into this more in depth in a future one where we get all the graphics lined up. So that's the next one above us, the formative world. And then we have, above that is the generative world, which we were sort of mentioning earlier, which is the geocosmos, our old friend Koresh's, where we live on the inside.
Uh-oh.
And
now we're going there now.
Right. Well, this is the generative world. The thing is, see, I've created these as belief systems. You can believe anything. You can believe moon's made out of green cheese, you know, and you know, people believe all kinds of stuff. And if everything people believe was true, we wouldn't have wars or anything. So obviously, belief and truth are not necessarily always coherent, you know, biological analysis. But nonetheless, there's reasons for belief systems, and people can argue their beliefs with data, such as geocentric versus heliocentric, and there's actually good data on both sides to argue it. So when we come to the this third world, or second one from the emanative side, the generative world, you know, if we look at it as the geocosmos, which is the cosmic egg, there actually is evidence for that. If we look at Koresh's experiments with
The
measuring
rectilinear. Yeah.
the rectilineator, right, measuring the surface of the Earth over 6 miles and finding out that it, rather than going off into space, the straight line runs into the Earth. And as well, if you look at the curvature of the Earth, take about 6 miles to really measure it. But if you look at railroad tracks, they at sea level they merge at about 2 miles, right? That's the vanishing point, which is an optical phenomenon. So if you see a ship sailing off to sea, it's not actually, you're not seeing it sail over the horizon, you're seeing it disappear into the horizon line, optically caused. So if you pull out a telescope, it's still there. In fact, the ship 12 miles away can be seen with a telescope, even though it's technically over the curvature of the Earth. So there's a lot of puzzles.
What you just
said. It is.
I mean, either that something would have to be very different about how we perceive light, right, and optics for that to make sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that was what there was that one gentleman in Alexandria. I think he tried to track him down, but we've been unsuccessful. That have written some mathematical papers saying that light.
Abdul Qadir, yeah.
Right, because he says if light moves in curved lines rather than straight lines, that mathematically, we can't tell if we're on the inside or the outside. Because space would be dimensional, as projective geometry would fundamentally dictate, rather than the Cartesian system, which we know is an internal system, subjective system. So anyway, the interesting thing is besides Koresh, a lot of the there was a lot of top secret Nazi experiments going on. Right? They had a station on the Baltic island of Rügen, which was a big infrared telescope. They were trying to take pictures of the British fleet up in the North Sea. Of course, the official story is it didn't work. But if you ever worked with German engineers or scientists, these guys don't clown around, man. They're not going to be in the middle of a big war effort and be goofing around and pretending we're on the inside of the Earth because of some mystical stuff. They would have had some serious reasons for thinking that.
So they believed in this. I mean, it's pretty much a known secret that the National Socialist regime, they believed that we were on the inside of the Earth, right?
Certain people did that had access to secret projects and could send ships around. So apparently there were ships in the South Atlantic trying to take pictures of U.S. and British ships in the North Atlantic. The thing is, I'm not saying that this stuff's absolutely true. I'm saying they believed it. And that they must have had some reason to believe. We look at Koresh's. So, and this is the point I'm making, is there's reasons for these different belief systems. So what I had to do is I've sort of categorized the different belief systems, and when I did, I realized that I was basically dealing with the Kabbalistic system, which I'd studied when I was young, but had sort of gone out of my mind. I sort of left all the Kabbalistic stuff when I came across Goethe's theory of color and Trevor's weather engineering work, and really started understanding that. And I started just getting into what I call pragmatic metaphysics. I didn't, it wasn't about belief. Whatever people want to channel stuff, that was really cool. They go to church, they could throw their money in the basket. People can do whatever they want. But I was interested in a metaphysics that actually related directly to physics.
Yeah.
What was otherwise? What's the point?
Exactly.
But it was interesting as I came across this, and it was when I was reading that book, De Labore Solis, Walter Vanderkamp, Airy's Failure Reconsidered, on this whole thing with parallax and the ether drift. I was meditating out in my garden in California, and just looking up at the sky. It was a beautiful summer day. There's sun up there and some clouds, and I wonder what it would feel like if I was actually in the center of the universe. If Earth was the center. I always thought that was nonsense that people used to believe until we got smart. So let me put myself in that. What would it be like to actually believe that? And it only took a couple seconds when everything just became so alive. Oh God, it would feel just like this. I've been here all my life, and somebody tried to tell me that what I felt and experienced wasn't true, and I had to believe this other view that scientists said was true, and if I didn't believe them, I was some kind of knucklehead that people looked down on. And
exactly.
give me smarmy answers because I was so stupid and stuff.
Exactly. We've all gotten those stares. Meanwhile, they've never.
We're probably getting them now from somebody.
Oh man, are we ever? Are we ever? Okay, here's an article that you turned me on to, a list of 40 questions. Isn't it strange that I want to kind of go over this with you. I want to ask you each one of these questions. And number one, every known form of energy decays, even light, namely with the square of the distance. And yet, the light rays of stars are still reaching us from supposedly billions of light years away.
Right. Yeah. No, that one's, there's a lot of, but you see now, if it's not photons spraying through space and it's not transverse light, but yet it's an extraluminal transmission, it's not actually going through space, but the transmission and reception points are rendered effectively the same point in space mathematically, and it's not sort of calculable in the dimension of time, right? Because it's, which is why, therefore, it doesn't take any time to travel and doesn't have to traverse any space. It's just where you make the connection point, which is obvious that, like when these astronauts are going up, they need some sort of connection point, whether it's eventually their eyes can adjust to it, or that they needed diffraction gratings that they weren't told were in the thing, or whatever the real story is. The light's not traveling. They just, it appears in a longitudinal transmission where it's at. So in that sense, the inverse square thing wouldn't make any difference. Neither would the parallax thing, interestingly enough, or potentially. So yeah, but no, that is a good point. Yeah, where's the inverse square? And of course, where things fade out in the distance, how come we can see these things from, like, you know, all these distances, right?
Billions. And you notice that first it was millions, then it became billions. Next it'll probably be trillions. Like, what are they running from? Why do they keep having to make the distances greater and greater and greater and greater? Why is that?
Because they're enforcing an insignificance on us. You know, when we start talking, I'll start talking to people, and this has been going on for decades. You know, start talking about some of the stuff. People go, "Oh, but we're so insignificant." I go, "To whom?" They go, "Oh, to the big thing out there." I go, "Yeah, but that's in your head. That's your worldview. You've been given this worldview where you are insignificant." But there are other worldviews where you're not insignificant, and you've been scared off those.
Exactly.
And that's what this four-world thing is. You're actually able to, I mean, so you can go into that manifest world and actually understand that insignificance, and there probably is a physical reality to that. It seems like that there is for many reasons. But then again, it seems like it's not for some reasons as well. So the thing is, what is absolute? You know, I suppose someday we'll figure that out. You know, there are, and that's why there's a whole thing in, like, common law that you need, like, 2 witnesses to verify an objective fact, because you know, all truth is subjective. So to verify objectivity, you need multiple witnesses. And in that's where, you know, man's descent into matter came from. Is that, you know, the subjective became, you know, anathema to any sort of acceptable reality, and everything had to be weighed and measured, you know, processed through physical equipment itself before it was actually accepted as being real. And any sort of higher order functioning that sort of came directly through the senses and subjective is said to be an illusion. Like, you're not really seeing colors, that's just some vibrating thing. You know, colors aren't real, nothing's real, right? That's all just like quantum stuff, and only appears because we're looking at it. And like I say, that's an enforcement of insignificance in the fundamental philosophy of it. So, and that's why I reject it wholly on that basis alone.
Isn't it amazing? They do 2 things at once. At one end, they're making us feel like insignificant little hairless apes floating on a grain of dust through the universe, right? And on the other end, they're making us think that we are God. Like, it's really amazing. It's like we're insignificant, yet it's this pure solipsistic mentality that cuts us off from any higher spiritual power. So the same thing, we have super low self-esteem, and yet we think we're gods. But combine them together, it seems like they oppose each other, but in the minds of most people, they really don't. It really seems to work, and it does the amazing goal of, like, destroying our spiritual connectedness, and also just destroying our esteem as enlightened spiritual beings. It's amazing how they made that work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but most people don't really get the spiritual much, because most of the spirituality is sort of filtered through fundamentalist type of philosophies termed religions. But that's true. Well, that's why I like this four-world theory, because it kind of opens the whole system up, and once you understand it. And of course, we've gone to the third world, so what's the fourth world? Is the archetypal. And of course, the archetypal is the mandala, or, the medicine wheel. You find it, the quaternity. You see it in all systems, pretty much, even like flowing through into energy systems. And and I get that from the model I use in that is the what they call a mandala of the Dhyani Buddhas from the Vajrayana of the Tibetans, and that is, and of course you see them as diagrams, but the diagram is just a map, and the map is us and our interaction, our subjective-objective interaction with reality. So fundamentally, that is the archetype, is us forming here, and that's the flat plane. So, right, are we on the outside of the Earth, or are we on the inside of the Earth? Well, if it's projective, and we don't know if light's moving straight or in curves, fundamentally, the Earth is a flat plane. It is, that's I figured, yeah, there we go. There's the mandala, and which is basically right, because you see the quadrants. There's the blue at the bottom, which is east. There's on the left is yellow, which is the will be the south in the northern hemisphere. There, that's like the sun overhead. Then there's a setting sun, which is the red, and then the green, which is nighttime, which is a dark green, which I've changed to violet in my sort of model, and expanded this out more in the spectrochrome style. We won't go too much into that, but basically because the center is white, the first quadrant's blue, but in the more sort of advanced studies of this, the guy in the center, Varochana, he's actually blue. So the blue guy comes out of the white thing, and then Akshobhya, they usually show as blue in the first quadrant. It's actually white, which shows the interchange of those two. But then, because supposedly Ratnasambhava over in the yellow thing, his light shines through the heart of the blue guy in the center, and that gives you the green thing on the back, which is one interesting explanation for it in a multidimensional sense. But I believe that the spectrochrome diagram basically shows it in a much better sense for as the unfolding. So, yeah, so this is basically the archetypal world. This is the world we really live in. Is this mandala?
Archetypes? There are four archetypes.
Well, there's one archetype that unfolds in this sort of quaternity and with the quintessence. And then, of course, it unfolds all different ways, and this gives us our whole sort of sacred geometric underpinning of reality. But fundamentally, that's the archetypal world. And sort of in the Vajrayana, you go through these different states, like there's 9 sort of stages, and like the 8th stage is sort of like the realization of the mandala. The 9th stage is what they call Dzogchen, which is also called like Chan or Zen. It's that stage. And this is so that's the subjective objective sort of gateway of processing through that system. You may not need it according to like the Zen teachings and stuff. You don't need that stuff, but it's a kind of, I just had that technical sort of mind, so I like to drift through these systems and figure out which was which.
It's amazing we're talking about disappearing stars. It's amazing where it leads us.
Yeah. Well, it should kind of get us back, because I had some other interesting things to discuss. And one of the things about the stars was the emanations from the stars, right? We just poke telescopes and stuff up. And but then there was, I'm going to find this article here that our good friend Mike Thoreau wrote, and it was based on what we know from the old Secret Life of Plants. There was it brought up a few interesting points. One was Cleve Baxter's experiments with the lie detectors and plants, and then there was George Lawrence detecting biological systems. And so George took a look at like Cleve Baxter's, where Cleve was basically connecting a lie detector to a plant, and they do things like lunge at the plant with a knife. The plant would like react. Obviously didn't want to get cut. So there is some sort of obvious consciousness or sensitivity to emotion well, I don't know if we can call it consciousness, we can call it awareness, because the two could be separate but linked. So there's the obviously an awareness of this. So Lawrence was looking at this, so he started looking at like leaf materials and putting them in telescopes. And there was this one scientist, I think Alexander Gurwitch, he was a Russian histologist, it says here, his experiments in the 1920s proved that all living cells, I'll move this over here to read straight up, all living cells produce invisible radiations of a biodynamic character. While observing the cells of onion roots, Gurwitch noticed that they began dividing with a distinct rhythm, causing him to trust that some kind of vital force from nearby cells was the cause. To verify this hypothesis, Gurwitch devised a type of ray gun which entailed mounting an onion root tip inside of a thin glass cylinder, which was then aimed at a matching arrangement with a small area of onion root exposed to act as a target. Gurwitch allowed the onion ray gun to bombard the sample for 3 hours, at which time he examined the target specimen under his microscope. The number of cell divisions in the irradiated area had increased by 25%. Right, so then he tried to block it and found he couldn't block it with crystal, only glass or gelatin did it. So anyway, going on that, that's what Lawrence started using, figuring, well, if these things are broadcasting, maybe, obviously the other side's picking up. So he started using a telescope with like leaf material. He used like protein soups from plant proteins and stuff, and he was picking up biodynamic signals. So Mike Thoreau, when he was director at Borderlands, he started experimenting with this, and fortunately, in the middle of the experiments, they came across all of George Lawrence's materials, which to that point had been pretty much lost, and he basically did some reproduction of that. Never fully followed through, but he did so, and that's what we'll have to get Mike on one of these days to really discuss this aspect of it. But the interesting thing is you use a biological detector like that, pointed at stars, and you're picking up biological signals. And Mike was pointing it up at the Big Dipper, which is basically where Lawrence was, and certainly picking up biological signals. And I think what I'm going to play here in the background while we're chatting here is this is the so-called tether incident. Remember, we're talking about stars in space. So here's some space footage from the space shuttle. And this was the so-called tether incident where the tether broke off. And what year? This would have been back in the 90s. Would have been about 97-ish, I think. 96, 97, around there. But what's interesting here is this astronauts are discussing this. They just talk about, oh, it's just some debris, dust floating around the spaceship, which is what they're trying to talk this stuff away. So people are watching it. Don't pay attention to that stuff. It's just dust. Look at the tether. That's what we're watching. Now, it's interesting. This stuff, these cameras were not solely visible in the optical wavelengths. They were also visible in ultraviolet. I believe Trevor Constable, he was the one that actually first pointed this out to me from Marty Stubbs, who was kind of recording this stuff, and that it was basically these things are going behind the tether. And so you measure them out, they're about 3 miles across. But if you look at them, they're like little pulsating, let's just pause this for a second. These things, they have like little sort of vacuoles in them, they got the holes, they all look the same. They're kind of following along certain lines, which is very interesting. So we'll forget about this long tether sort of thing that broke.
They look like those little bions that Wilhelm Reich discovered, or Brownian motion, quote unquote.
All right, look, here's a good one crossing. These things are pulsing, and they're flowing through. And of course, we go into like Trevor Constable's work on cosmic pulse of life, where he was filming these sorts of things using infrared film out in the desert.
He called them critters, right?
Critters, right, below the optical wavelengths. Here we are above the optical wavelengths, and they're showing up in space.
Wow.
Now, if these things carry intelligence, and we're going to, like Jerry Vasilato's told me about how he was using sort of like device-assisted remote viewing, right, where he was connecting himself radionically to the ground and staring at like stars, and he would go in and actually experience sort of like the life waves of planets, the rise and fall of civilizations. But he would actually insert himself at different points in the timeline, and he felt that he was basically coming in, and a craft was basically forming around him as he was coming in, as sort of just like the way that things work coming into space. The layers around the atmospheric layers around the planet. Yeah, look at here. We even see these little. I used to do microorganism research when I was very young, and these sort of things that you see in parameciums and amoebas and stuff basically pulse around, and this is what space is filled with. This stuff, not in the optical wavelengths, obviously. You're not seeing any stars. You're seeing this stuff like these pulsing things.
So just so people have some background, the tether experiment was an experiment that NASA did where they ran this long line super high up in the atmosphere and tried to detect the voltage potential?
Exactly, and the thing sort of snapped. I don't know if it was from the too much voltage or whatever. Right, I think they were looking at it as a potential way of powering things in space.
Okay, so this video is official video from NASA showing living etheric beings, or whatever you want to call them, floating up in the atmosphere in space.
Exactly.
Wow.
So these things could be that a lot of the experiences people have with UFOs and things are actually contact with higher sort of dimensional beings that are basically, this is how we can see them actually operating. So we pretty much have run through that. So we'll come back to here. So yeah, very interestingly, what really is going on in space and how much of what we've been told through NASA, because we look at NASA, so okay, it seems like you get above the atmosphere, you see the stars. Well, how come NASA would say you can't? Some astronauts say you can, some say you can't. Some, like Collins, sometimes space is black, sometimes it's so full of stars, and it's like depend on who wrote which book he was supposedly claiming in and over what time. And also the fact that all the photos are taken, you still can't get white light photos of the sun in space.
Yeah.
Even with this basic sort of dimming filters and stuff, they're still not there. And the fact that there was no stars in this catalogs, now you go and like download the time lapses from the International Space Station. It's like no problem. We can take pictures of stars now. So that's what the mystery is. Not that you can't see the stars. The mystery is that you can't get a straight answer about the whole thing and what's really happening with it. There's so many hidden sort of points on all this, and that's what I mean. I think it's always good to keep an open mind. We're not here to put. You go ahead.
People should be aware of the fact that you communicated with NASA intensely through the 80s and 90s, nonstop. Like you were getting the official scoop from these guys, and even what they were saying was conflicting across different departments, right?
Yeah, I probably only talked to them for maybe about a year to 2 years maximum. It was through probably 87 to 88 in that range, and yeah, I mean, I pretty much got what information I could at the time. We were looking at all sorts of different things. Thing was, I was running Foundation. I was trying to do like 20, 30 things at once, and a lot of my personal research sort of sat to the side, which is why it's pretty much taken 25 years to really get around to telling this story and putting this data together. It's always been in the back of my mind.
So
just
this four worlds, I mean, if you think about it, this is really the most groundbreaking head of knowledge that anyone can really come upon in the world today. I mean, really now. This is completely... revolutionary is not the word for it.
Yeah, well, for me, it sort of satisfies... it sits well with me, right? Everybody's got their own story. And I say all truth is subjective. This is just my perspective. Having had many fortunate experiences of meeting many amazing people in my life, having been through many books, and being able to put myself into the different people's worldviews. And that's why I would realize if you look at like Tesla's inventions and compare them with like Farnsworth's inventions, they're basically different. You look at T. Henry Moray, right? Because these guys all had sort of a different worldview. They knew that there was this etheric force that could be tapped, but they were basically doing it differently because they had sort of different worldviews and ideas of the way they did it. So everybody sort of has their particular one. There's obviously common archetypes between the two, and that's what I've always sought out, is the underlying archetypal structure to see where everything is at. So I've just kind of mapped out in notebooks, go through the different systems and map out the archetypal structures and lay them side by side. And that's where I finally realized that the Vajrayana Mandala really held the core, except it really seemed then to fit in. It was really through this sort of meditative work I was doing, following the different belief systems, that I've sort of put in this higher order functions of them. So we have the four worlds. The four sections of the mandalas are the four worlds, right? Because it's a multidimensional sort of aspect. And I suppose it's hard for people to really conceive potentially of what multidimensionality is. A lot of people these days are sort of drifting over South America. There's like thousands of people flocking every month down to South America, to do ayahuasca, just to go down there and try to gain these higher visions. And I've gone there and done that run. I found it made me throw up more than I had visions. But nonetheless, the higher order neurotransmitters open up higher dimensional sort of perceptive functions within the mind. You don't need those. Steiner showed how it could actually be done by creating higher cognitive functions in the brain. So that, as I was saying earlier, that people's worldviews, people have this like worldview that we're insignificant. Earth goes around the sun. We're just this lump of rock fell together, around this nuclear furnace that just happened to happen, and we're insignificant, and we're lucky we've been able to scratch out as much as we can, and thank God these guys thought up dark matter to keep their theories together, or we'd really be lost. But on the other hand, obviously there's this incredible awareness happening, and as Steiner pointed out, using things like Goethe's theory of color or Goethe's metamorphoses of plants, once you get your head around how they function, they become your cognitive organs. You're no longer thinking through this banal sort of materialistic worldview. Your worldview is your organ of cognition. And see, that's why, like when we discussed it on the one hangout where we talked about the trivium and quadrivium, right? In the trivium, you have like your grammar, logic, and rhetoric. People's worldview is their logic, and they put it before their grammar, so all their intake is being filtered through their worldview. So the opportunity in the four world thesis to have four different worldviews that function together through this common archetypal link, you're no longer trapped by the logic at the forefront, and you're able to like grammatically assess objective reality in, let's say, a more unprejudiced fashion. So, that's sort of the, and like I say, I really got a lot of those ideas out of Steiner's work and Ernst Lehr's work, Man or Matter, which is where and Günter Wachsman's The Etheric Formative Forces. These are the books which will guide people into gaining these higher order functions of consciousness. You don't need to go to South America and drink psychedelic brew. I'm not stopping anybody. In fact, I'll end up back there again when I get a chance. More because I'm interested in the research on it. And I was fortunate to be there with Dennis McKenna, and he's interested in setting up a research foundation, up in the Andes there to actually do clinical research papers.
He related to Terence McKenna?
Yeah, his brother. Yeah, Dennis is the professor of ethnopharmacology up at the University of Michigan. So he's gone and taken the hard scientific route, and he's very skeptical of some of my points of view, because he's a scientist, well trained, but a brilliant man. I've had some very good conversations with him to the point where he said he was getting scared because he was almost starting to believe me. When I was explaining to him about like Lily Kalisko's crystallization experiments with the metals and the planets, which of course we can get into when we get into the four world. So yeah, I think I've more or less sort of talked myself out today. I think we've covered some really good points here, and we'll get another one of these going very soon. I'm getting back focused again.
I hope so, because I have a lot more questions for you, man. I'm looking at a list here of like 30 questions I have ready.
Okay, well, why don't you give me a couple more? I mean, my throat's getting a little sore from talking, and
we'll just do two more two more questions.
Okay.
Let's save the rest for later. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah, no, we can do. We can do. We'll get back. We were going to do these on regular rhythm. I've had a lot happening in my life, not germane to this particular line of discussion, but also very interesting, and we'll get into that in some other discussions. But yeah,
yeah,
go ahead with your questions.
definitely need to do a show about your trials with the Maori tribe in New Zealand because you know, one of the things I love about you, man, is you're you're not just a smart guy or a knowledgeable guy. You're a warrior. You know, you saw this tribe of people, the natives of New Zealand. They were under fire from the fascists that run the government of New Zealand now, and you came to their aid. And because you came to their aid, they sent a bunch of tax goons after you. You know,
Yeah.
you're always coming to the rescue.
Well, in that sense, yeah, they sort of rescued me in the first place, but then in the middle, they got turned on, which is, you know, basically it's what they call a hapu, which is basically means clan or tribe. And New Zealand's a very unique place in the world where basically it was set up by treaty. You know, there was the sovereign nation was set up. You know, the United Tribes, Confederation of the Northern Tribes, Hereditary Chiefs of the Northern Tribes, various names, and then the British Crown cut a deal with them, the Treaty Te Tiriti o Waitangi 1840, which gave rights of governance to the Crown as so that the infant government could get it together here through the Maoris, and guaranteed the sovereignty and full possession of lands. And of course, it wasn't honored, as you know. We know the whole classic history of you know, colonization around the world, which goes hand in hand with kind of these materialistic worldviews and everything. And they, yeah, so it's taken a long time, 170, 180 years. So yeah, we're in the middle of a big issue right now up in the northern tribes, which are sort of gathered together in what now they call iwis, which was not the traditional sort of get-together, but the Ngāpuhi, which is, they never signed their sovereignty over, and the Crown's got to kind of admit it. So yeah, somehow I got dragged in the middle of that one, which is a fascinating story that we're not going to really get into here because I really need to lay down more of the groundwork around that, and we will do that at some point because that has to do with everybody's sort of situation around the world. This whole, you know, look at all these different movements, and I've been looking at them for a few decades. You know, state citizenship, sovereign citizenship, free man, all that. They're all interesting sort of progressions. The only thing that's really important and the thing that's guaranteed in international law is people's rights of self-determination. And in New Zealand, we're fortunate that we can express our rights of self-determination through the organic documents here, which New Zealand set up in such a way that they've still potentially honored. And they are lip service honored, unlike in the States where, you know, you wave the Constitution, they like throw the book at you. So, because there's a question, well, you know, are you the posterity name, blah, 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 blah. Here it's pretty clear cut. So yeah, I've been lawfully adopted into a tribe up north, one of the many, but very active, very noble. I've been fortunate to sit with the elders over the last few years and discuss, you know, all of these things. So that the reason I haven't been sort of on this is because you know, we've had some major events happening in that other thing. So they're basically my family, and we look after each other. So there's a lot on. But let's get back to the stars and space stuff for right now, and we can discuss all of that at another time.
Okay. Question number 2. Everything is subject to lines of force, which are curved, as is well known. But only light supposedly travels in a straight line.
Right. And it appears to, from our perspective, but how it actually does is another question. In fact, that was one of the questions, like when I would discuss with people, yeah, magnetic lines up there. When I would discuss this with people on like the rectilineator, and people go, well, why don't you just check it with a laser? I go, well, yeah, well, the laser might be subject to different laws than forcing the mechanical line. We don't know. So we don't really know, you know, what is happening with that. So that's something that, especially when you're dealing with sort of stellar distances, and the fact that everything's projected, really. I mean, to really try and understand this, if it is all electrical, then basically this anthropocentric world, we're sort of like in a virtual world, like the physical sort of stuff in space, the planet, the sun, all that sort of stuff. That's sort of like the circuit board. Then sort of the programming is coming down from like the geocentric or anthropocentric. This whole life body around us is actually woven as a virtual world. Wow. That's the higher order sort of function. So you think of it in that sense. So whether that's coming in curves or how it's actually happening, I mean, yeah, maybe if you're on some sort of psychedelic and stuff, you might be able to start kind of comprehending.
That's totally mind-blowing,
those things.
What you just told me, because now I understand what projective geometry is all about. And if indeed above us are 7 heavens and the sun is a projection coming out of through several of them, things start to make sense now. How this is kind of a video game, and like the operating system, the Xbox is up there.
Right. Exactly. That's how I think of it. So I've tried to think of these 4 levels and how they like sort of interpenetrate and function. And
so this is great because now I can see how the 4 worlds makes real physical, like physics sense. It's not just a mystical jargon. It's actual model for understanding the real manifest world and the higher worlds as well, which are just as real, if not realer than this world. I just want people to know that.
Oh yeah. That's my organ of cognition, which is ever sort of changing and learning as it goes along. But the archetypes are there, and that's what I realize is right. So you can be the geocentric, a heliocentric, the geocosmos, or the mandala. There are constants. There's a constant that flows through all of them. And those are the archetypal symbols. That's what I made that video, Quaternity. That's fundamentally showing a path through the archetypes. And then same with the Dorje video that I did, Dorje Blessing. That was really just trying to lay down the traditional sort of Vajrayana. So as I went on to this next phase, people could go back and refer to it in a simple form, since it wasn't really available in a simple form, much to my disappointment. It took me like 40 years to figure that one out. Whereas, I can listen to, bless their souls, I listen like hours and hours to the Dalai Lama, and it's lovely stuff. But there's no technical details,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like the what's going on here, man? You guys are like learning all this special stuff, and you're only going to come and talk to me about compassion and love?
Exactly.
I figured that stuff out on myself,
Yeah, and that's why I like Steiner, because he comes at things from a real Western perspective. And that's not to say Eastern or Western is better than Eastern, any of that. We just need a little more meat on the bones,
Right. Well, that's why I, give Lama Anagarika Govinda, my thanks for. Because I was reading all this stuff, and I do have a shelf of books over a little further down, and you can see of Tibetan books going back to when I was a teenager. I started with Lobsang Rampa when I was about 12, but sort of went off that stuff fairly quickly onto Evans Wentz's translations, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrine, and Tibetan, Book of the Dead, Bardo Thodol, which I really didn't know why, because I didn't understand the stuff, but something attracted me to it, and I just kept on struggling through it, and it probably wasn't until early 80s I came across Anagarika's book. Well, I read his book Way of the White Clouds back when I was a teenager, but then I came across, probably early 80s, I came across Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, and in that book he just lays it all out in simple schematic diagrams. I'm going, God, this stuff's so simple. But of course Anagarika Govinda was German. That was his taken name. I don't know what his real name was, but he had that sort of schematic, sort of oriented mind, and it was through that I was actually able to understand finally what these different things were, what the skandhas, the aggregates of consciousness and stuff, which I explained both in Quaternity and the Dorje Blessing. So if you see that, so you start, if you go look through my recent works over the last couple of years, you see this constant sort of archetypal stream, and you'll see what's actually important to me and what I'm trying to get out of this. And that's why I'm trying to figure out the best way, because I had 3 videos planned. I was going to do one secrets of light and color, where we're going to cover some of this today, and then get more into like the Newton versus Goethe and the light stuff, which ties in with the mandala, which is why I threw it into quaternity. And then I wanted to do one on basically the four worlds, and I just want to do one just on the mandala, and I realized they're all kind of the same one. And plus, when I did the Dorje video, that was just going to be a little, I just wanted to knock something out in a couple weeks just to get back into the flow of things. And those 18, 19 minutes took me 3 months to do, and that was with my good friend and resident skeptic Dave Schofield, right, who helps me. He's a brilliant video tech and electronic music guy, so he's been sort of my creative partner on that. But even that, it took us 3 months to really pull off what we did because we got so involved in it. So I realized, 3 90-minute videos was a bit, chances of me ever completing those in short term. So what I'm trying to do now is, do these hangouts is good because it helps me focus the thoughts, and then we can do, one, potentially even the next one on the four worlds. I actually did start collecting stuff, but maybe we'll sort of plan that in the next couple weeks and get focused on that, because that's a good one to understand. And then once people get that, then kind of all these other pieces fit into place. They see where everything is. Then we go look at like geological theories. You can start seeing these archetypal patterns functioning in there as well, especially now that we're looking at like electric universe theory as far as like electroalchemic transmutative formation of the geological layers and electric fossilization. So we'll try to get this archetypal underpinning behind. It was just fun talking about the stars. I mean, that's been just my experiences with it.
It's a great practical gateway to really understanding the importance of occult knowledge. Like all this stuff that's been hidden from us now. In Pythagoras' time, you learn it in kindergarten, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh no, definitely. That's I'm still learning. It's not that I know that much. People say I'm smart. I actually know smart people, and I'm lucky to have a lot of them around that I can talk to and learn from. And that's how.
Well, the great thing you do, besides leadership, is you're an awesome synthesizer. And we need more of that now than ever, because the hardest job is not to gather knowledge, it's to connect the dots between those schools of knowledge. So very few people can do that.
Yeah, well, that's why I was lucky. I mean, I kind of had that, but I suppose that's why Borderlands sort of showed up in my thing. And it would have been nice if we could have kept going with that stream, but that was sort of my boot camp. And I had to deal with everybody's different worldview, or it would have been hard, And even then, I made a lot of mistakes because I look back and I wasn't as nice to some of these streams of info coming through as I should have been. I rejected them because they didn't quite fit at the time. In the way out, even though I was kind of open and looking at all these certain things, it would have gone a lot better if I hadn't made mistakes, but that was all part of learning. So I just look at what I did learn. And I even go back and look at some of the things I wrote, like some of my early writings on light and color. I'm going, I was kind of backwards on that thought. I was kind of on the point, but I didn't quite get it. So, that's why we learn and keep on going forward and keep doing new materials.
Absolutely. I look forward to a lot more of these. I have many more questions just between me and you. I want to get out there and plunge people further and further deeper down the rabbit hole with us. Since you dragged me down, I was kind of hovering around like, level 1, level 2. I was kind of happy about that, feeling good. And then you said, hey, come on down over here.
I know. I remember, when you first came across the Geocosmos, I had to grab your feet and pull you back down to earth for a bit.
I was like, I had a meathead reaction. I was like, what? Stop.
Well, I did too. When I first kind of came across, the geocentric sort of stuff, I thought that was the only. I go, the other stuff's wrong. It took me a while to kind of synthesize and accept, that they were all potentially right. That there was aspects of all of them. That reality is multidimensional. We can't be so sure that everything's right. We just, keep a suspended judgment till all the facts are in, and there's still a lot of facts that aren't in. So we do our best, and that's why my theory of knowledge is based on trying to find the archetypal underpinnings and connect things to that. And
Absolutely.
that's why I can pull up all these sort of facts and ideas and stuff from different fields of knowledge in my mind, because they fit different archetypal categories, so they just sort of naturally fall in there. They're not just like linear streams of random facts that I've got to go back into. It's I think everybody does this to a certain extent, but the more conscious you become of it, then the easier it becomes to understand all these things.
Yeah, we
So,
all need a guide, a Sherpa, a mentor to guide us through this darkness, this dark age that we're in right now, because we are in a dark age. And I consider myself very lucky that I met Thomas Joseph Brown. We haven't met in person yet, but that'll happen soon, God willing. And I just want to say thank you. You really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and once you really kind of initiated me into the deeper occult knowledge, and everything changed about my life. And I understand why you're so into the archetypal model, because the archetypes give you a way to recognize patterns and to really start piecing together pieces of information till they make real sense. For example, if the geocosmos is correct, then it's a complete and total inversion of the current line of thinking we've been given. At that point, anyone who thinks rationally or logically is going to have to, one, admit that there is, yes, a creative, intellectual architect, and there is also someone opposing that creative, intellectual architect that's architected these lies as well. That's a lot for an average person to bear, emotionally speaking. Intellectually, it's pretty simple. Intellectually, it's super easy, but emotionally, it's devastating. It's absolutely a crusher, man. It'll destroy you. Like, oh my goodness. I just want to go back to Monday Night Football after that. I was ready to turn on.
yeah. The thoughts cross my mind: get some cheap beer and put the sports on. And it's like, nah.
Give me a Miller Lite over here.
What's the point? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been very fortunate in my life. Had some pretty amazing people. Like say people like Riley Crabb, Trevor Constable, who I really credit with, the information he gave me and the direction he gave me, showing the real world application of the etheric technologies, and so what he called plowing me into Steiner, and showing me Goethe's theory of color. For what I credit mentors like that along the way. That I've just been very, like I say, I've been very fortunate, and I've many people. Even working with people like Mike Thoreau, who sort of came to me as a young fellow out of the military with a keen mind, and man, he would just like pick stuff up so quick, and carried on. I always figured, man, Mike was like way smarter than me. He just wasn't as like focused as the overall thing, right? He'd get like off into his projects, but definitely brilliant minds, and that's what every mind's different. So it's always kind of good to work with different people, because everybody's got their different skills, and I guess one of mine was just being able to listen to people long enough to understand what their worldview was. And see, that's the thing, like you're saying with the geocosmos. Well, from the Kabbalah, technically, that is part of the formative thing. We can go now to like the Big Bang thing, and you actually get like the timeline of the Big Bang. You can go find the pictures on the net. And got first million second, second million second, blah 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 blah. How everything like unfolded. Well, that's their sort of Kabbalah. That's the materialist Kabbalah. You go to the real Kabbalah, and there is their pattern of unfolding, which I found curiously enough fits these different belief systems that people have had based on certain aspects of physical reality that they've been able to detect. So, like I'm saying, it's not that one's true or the other one's true against the other. There's aspects of truth in all of them. And if we are spiritual beings here having this physical experience, and the whole thing is about like learning and growing, then and space is multidimensional, then obviously this is where we need to go to learn. And with all respect to the people that just like to sort of sit there and listen to channeling and do all that, I hope they get some great stuff out of there and it satisfies their soul. For me, I want to know what's like really happening out there. I don't want to talk to disembodied entities. I want to perceive everything myself, because the truth comes from within. The truth will always come from within. We can learn things from outside, and people can show their truth from outside, and it can resonate with us, but the truth doesn't come from outside. Truth comes from the balancing of the inside and outside, and that's why I say the Vajrayana Mandala sort of really has the best of that. And that's why I like explaining that in the extension of bringing it into line with like Goethe's theory of color, atmospheric color formation, and Steiner's ethers, and then the spectrochrome. All these relate. They all tie together as this one fundamental archetypal structure. And people can believe whatever they want. I'm just happy with that one. So that's where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. So before we bid you all adieu, I just want to make it clear where Thomas Joseph Brown is coming from. So your teachers and mentors were like Trevor Constable, Riley Crabb, etc., etc. Their teachers were guys that had links to the Victorian era, I'm sure, and then the Victorian area they were then we're going back to like Goethe and stuff, and then that harkens back to the Renaissance and all the knowledge that was brought over and maintained by the Arabs, and then that goes back to Pythagoras, and then that goes back to ancient Egypt and wherever they got it from as well. So I'm talking right now to one of our last few remaining links. I mean, really, right? It's not to toot our own horn or your horn. It's just the way it is. This is really what's going on. And you're one of those rare people that isn't in it for the money. You're kind of the kind of person that's kind of adverse to money. You don't even want to think about it. But I consider myself very lucky that we still have this last link, and I think it really says a lot about how much just friction you've had to face, and how much just pressure and resistance and just harassment we both have. And when you're for the truth, when you're for the light, it just comes par for the course. So thank you, Thomas Joseph Brown, for being Thomas Joseph Brown.
No, thanks for that, Tech. No, I appreciate it, and I really appreciate everything you've done to move all this forward. The Aetherforce.com website's constantly sort of expanding and getting a lot of. We didn't get any of the younger folks on here today, but there's a lot of very interesting people getting involved in trying to learn all these different things. And heck, I'm still learning. I'm still trying to get through books and figure things out. I'm just at the very beginning. Now that I've kind of gotten where I'm at, I'm going, oh yeah. Now here's where I want to go. There's still so much to learn, and I'm just happy to share it as we go along and have these conversations.
Yeah, so, and we're noticing what's happening, Rob. We're building a network, really. Like, for the first time, I think normal people understanding we have to start talking with each other and building a network. Because if we don't do it, no one else is. Because if we don't do it, the bad guys are going to build some fake garbage and try to sell us $30 bottles of salt water or some bogus crap. So.
Exactly, and we're at a point in time now. Now's the time to exercise self-determination, and if our self-determination is to understand the true nature of the universe, then this is what we do. And when we're going to do it next lifetime, sit around, let somebody else do it, just kick back because some guy figured out dark energy and we don't have to think anymore. That's all figured out, you knuckleheads. What are you thinking like that for? So yeah, that's just all we can do is just stand in truth. That's all it's about, and that's where I'm coming from. And that's why I've sort of had my sort of interactions with what I call the demons in the mandala, like the tax thugs that sort of pop up with like their corrupt made-up paperwork, almost like whack-a-moles, right when I'm really getting to critical points and understanding things. This stuff sort of like occurs, so I figure it's part of like my spiritual dharma to get into these situations, and that there's a bigger picture to them, and because it affects everybody. We're either sovereigns or slaves. Are we living our life, or are we living somebody else's life, or what they expect of us? And of course, I don't mean that we can get away with anything we want. And of course, that was always the great misunderstanding of Crowley's "Do what thou wilt." People thought, "I do what you want," right? But the will was your true nature, which you came across through the Abramelin the Mage sort of workings. Knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel. The true will, the reason you're here on Earth, not to just go crazy because you want to unfold your characterological imprints in some sort of wild orgy of sensation, but rather to build the consciousness and structure the higher bodies that form the physical, through gradual progression and understanding of our relationship with the structure of our mind to the actual structure of the universe as perceived through the sensorium properly directed rather than through equipment that's got meters and stuff on it. Oh, that data's handy too, right? You can weigh it all up. But anyway, I could go on, but I am sort of talked out. I really appreciate this discussion here, Tech, and everybody that sort of watched. And look, we'll be back again soon, I'm sure.
God willing. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. You have an awesome day.
All right. You too, Tech. Take care. Bye.
May the force be with you.